Namaste. Brahma grantija marutanugatiना chittena hritpankaje Surinam anuranjakah Shruti-padam yoyam swayam rajate Yasmat grama vibhaga varna rachana lankara jati kramo Vande nadatanam tamuddhura jagad geetam ude shankaram. With that opening verse from Sangeeta Ratnakara, I take great pleasure in welcoming you all to yet another interesting session in Atharva Forum. And today I have the great pleasure of interacting with internationally acclaimed personality who wears multiple hats, none other than Shri Palghat Ramprasad ji, who has perhaps the rare combination of being a PhD in economics as well as having an illustrious Carnatic tradition, high-class Carnatic performer as well. He is, of course, renowned for his music throughout the world. The other cap that he wears is the PhD in economics. So he has traversed both the worlds of academia as well as our tradition. Namaste Ramprasad ji. Welcome to Atharva Forum. It gives me pleasure to have you here, and it's indeed my pleasure to interact with you on this forum.
Likewise.
I'll start with a very generic question. That is, our Shastriya Sangītam has come a long way since the times of Vedas, through Nati Shastra, through Sharangadeva, Ramaswamy Dikshitar, or in the recent past, Hariyakudi Ramanuja Iyengar, and what it is currently now. What are your thoughts on this journey? Largely, what has remained constant and what has changed?
So, as you rightly put it beautifully, starting from the Vedas, traversing through the centuries, through the Bhakti movement, and then through our trinities, and then there was a point of inflection where the Shastriya Sangītam started changing its course from being predominantly performed in the temples or very momentous occasions to sabhas. So that, give or take, like about 10 or 15 years, coincided with the advent of the current concert format that Sri Hariyakudi Ramanuja Iyengar came up with. Now, why is this a significant moment? When music started taking place for predominantly an entertainment purpose, when you talk about sabhas, then what Sri Ramanuja Iyengar was able to achieve was preserve the true DNA of our Shastriya Sangītam, which is nothing but aligning to the divine, aligning with spirituality. And from your opening verse of both Natya Shastra as well as from Sarangadevas, entertaining through music for elevating the spiritual level of people. So that had to be intact. So any kind of change that happened over time, this was something which was preserved. Even while Ramanuja Iyengar had come up with this new format of packing a 3.5, 4 hour concert with about 10 or 12 songs, or 12 or 15 songs of different varieties. It could be variety with respect to language, with respect to the tempos of the song, with respect to the ragams. That concept of divinity remained pretty intact. The idea was to ensure that when it becomes a mere source of entertainment, right, while we have to preserve the bhakti aspect or the divinity aspect, it has to cater to a large cross section of people. So some might like, short songs, some might like long songs, some might like only Kalpita Sangeetam, some might like only, Kalpana. So to give this variety, to ensure that the footfalls remain a constant, at the same time, you don't dilute music of its divine aspect. This change came in, and as we all know, we still follow that, despite attempts trying to, take that away. But largely over time, when you think about how our Shastriya music has, traversed through time, until today, the one thing which has remained constant is the aspect of how our music connects to the divine. Now, what has changed very briefly in 2 or 3, succinct points? All 3 points come under the umbrella of trying to casualize, right? Make music, Carnatic music casual rather than intense. You may think that it is a kind of overcompensation for people think that it is so unapproachable, therefore we have to make it casual, but there is a limit to it. Now the question is who defines limits? When you talk about how you make Carnatic music casual, when you talk about the learning aspect, first, people like parents, particular students, they want music to be fun, right? This is serious stuff. I mean, this is like Vedas. Would you expect someone learning under Roger Federer to learn tennis in a fun way so that they can be top 10 ATP players? No, absolutely not. Or would you expect someone like Yashasvi Jaiswal, who all he was doing was like flying kites, and suddenly one day, he got a call up in Indian lab? No, he did not. So if you want to make it big, it entails sacrifices, right? But there is an attempt to say that, what, this is not required, we can make it fun, and try to bring down the concentration or the actual force that is required as sacrifice to music. So now everything is becoming student centric. Whenever they are free, they will come and learn, despite the 15 other classes they have. Now it's totally fine if you just want to be a casual Rasika. That is totally fine. But if you're using the time of a professional, right, and for one-on-one class, then it entails seriousness. So that is the first thing which I see as a drastic change in terms of learning. The second thing, the deliberate attempts of trying to overcompensate for this power dynamics and making, the relationship between guru and shishya extremely flippant. Like gurus and shishyas take pictures together, it's fine, but there is a limit to it. As if like it's so casual and we are all chill. I mean, it doesn't have to be, right? Whatever it is, a person who teaches, forget his or her age. If a person is teaching someone else, then by definition you assume some kind of a greater knowledge of that person that has to be imparted to you. So that kind of step up and step down is definitely required, and you don't have to be like totally chill about it. No, teachers are teachers, students can be students, and you don't have to display this kind of affection outwardly. So this kind of PDA in terms of power dynamics is something which I see as Third, as a way of life, musicians trying to say that, what, I had a beer, I had wine, and I stay up late. Not required. Not required. If it is your choice, great. But just trying to force fit it by saying that, what, we are normal people, and then trying to overcompensate it by, saying that the way of life is not any, sacred than anyone else, something which is totally avoidable. So these are the three changes that I see. And you can clearly see this from all kinds of social media, all social media posts, that this kind of casualness is sliding into music, which is not required in my opinion.
Perhaps you have hit more than what I was intending as this one small question, because you have opened up a lot of dimensions of music, particularly both in terms of a student who is learning music, a teacher who is teaching music, and a performer who is performing music, and a Rasika who is consuming music, perhaps, if I may use the term consumption, although it's not rightly true, because as per our views, traditional views on music, it is both the performer and the Rasika are both the integral parts of it. Both of them, that sahridayata comes in, and that's where the elevation of consciousness that you were talking about comes into picture. But since you have touched the strings of education per se, since I'm also from an academic background, I completely agree with you. And I will go one step ahead and say that today, what we are seeing as a big transformation where students are no longer students, they appear to be more like our customers. And we are no longer teachers, perhaps we are service providers, that education service providers, and we have to keep the customer always happy. Because for which this all casualty, the casualness leads to all casualties that you and I are now perhaps talking about and loathing on. One other aspect, see, over the years, our art form, whether we like it or not, has flourished because of the patronization, be it from a landlord in a small suburb or from a king in a larger kingdom. And fast forward today, it has drastically changed in the name of democratization of music. Now, who are the patrons today? Actually, I know that one obvious answer is Sabhas, but then more than Sabhas, because you have the ringside access So who do you think in this democratized world of music are the real patrons of the art form today?
Attempts are definitely being made. I'm not saying it should not be made, but whether it's made in the right intent is a question. Therefore, I'm not going to subscribe to that phrase as yet. As you rightly said, it started off with zamindars, landlords who provided a lot of money. I'm talking about the early 20th century, starting from then on. And then there was a period. I mean, I'm not a historian, so maybe my facts might lack some details. But from a practitioner's point of view, because given that my grandfather is Palghat Mani Iyer, he has consistently played over decades for all top artists.
Here's the mridangam, the most highly evolved of all our drums. In South India, it is used as an accompanying instrument for song or dance. It's also played solo.
The one striking feature is that there was a period, there was like about 3 or 4 decades, wherein the patronage from these landlords or these zamindars or the local, big shots was not as much. So it used to be completely based on footfalls, right? So funnily, there was an incident, set of incidents where my grandfather used to allude that the share of footfalls which used to be distributed across the artists on stage, sometimes it used to be in terms of coins. So sometimes it used to be like 24 rupees 50 pice. So that will be given to him and he will take it back home, right? So that used to be the sambhavana that he gets for playing in a concert. So those were the things that happened. The the very interesting thing that we have to notice here, I'm going to bring a slightly different dimension here, is that despite all these odds, the musicians stuck to this. Okay. Now we talk about whether it's inclusive, whether it's exclusive. That's a separate topic which we can touch upon later. But the kind of challenges that they went through, but still, wanting to ensure that the tradition is preserved, they went through the drill and they ensured that the art form is not lost. So that way, whatever we are today, we completely owe it to to our predecessors, especially those stalwarts who made it really big in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. It is literally it is their arms that we are living a very comfortable life today. So that happened. And then in the 80s and 90s is when the sponsorships actually picked. Even I have sung in a lot of concerts wherein, even in 80s, I'm talking about 80s or even early 90s, where sponsorship was not a big thing, right? It used to be based on membership on the corpus and footfalls. So 90s, big time corporate sponsorships took a center stage. Of late, I'm hearing through reliable sources that sometimes political affiliations seem to be, starting to enter this fray of, promoting this art by giving money. It is one thing if the affiliation has strong roots and strong belief in the core of our Carnatic music, which is divinity. But if the affiliation is just on the other side and they are trying to provide money for concerts to happen, then in my opinion, that can be a bit dangerous because of obvious, agenda that we know of. So that we need to be careful about.
Yeah, ultimately it comes down to the wherewithal and subsistence. And no matter how much one artist is completely dedicated to the field of art, we have seen examples in the compositions of the Trinity and especially the Dikshitar, when at one point of time, perhaps his only female disciple, I don't recollect her name now, but this was an incident in Tirvaru. That's how it has come down to us. It came to an extent where there was no food for them to eat even for that day. Kamalu, she goes to the wife of Dikshitar and says that you pawn my bangle and get then thereby feed it. Gone are those days of that much of extreme devotion to the art form. If I may say so, the early Vokism that was started perhaps 30, 40 years back, if it is going to take shape, it is going to be a problematic issue. But specifically our Shastriya music, do you think there are boundaries? Because on the one hand, you say you have degree of freedom in the form of Kalpana Swaram, so on and so forth. So is there a difference between constructively pushing the boundaries and experimenting for personal agenda? Like right from the age-old period, GNB experimented in the Durita Kalam, then Balam coming down MD has experimented in the Mandarasthai and also sometime touching the Atimandarasthai. And Balamurali Krishna ji coming and experimenting in a different way. So are they constructively pushing the boundaries and experimenting for personal agenda? Or starting a raga? There are other examples like starting a raga and changing it in between, saying I call it my whims and vagaries, or I want that azadi from that rule of sticking to that raga. Or like last year, a controversial institution bringing in unprecedented legdem sessions. These are also experimentation.
No field can survive without evolution over time. What art teaches you, even if you're a practitioner, the one thing that art teaches you is humility in various forms. The one greatest form of humility that art teaches you is that whatever you try as a practitioner, you humbly accept people's reception, however it is. There have been so many instances, so many concerts in which Shamangri Srinivas had started off with a Tana. I mean, for this pedigree, he could have continued, right? But he didn't pursue that any further because he has openly said he didn't have much of reception. Pancharatna Kirtas have been sung as main songs. I'm talking about 50s and 60s. It's not that experimentation have never been done, and it should not be the case. Experimentation has to be done. The question is, now let's say I try something consciously I know for a fact whether it has a proper reception or not. Now, for my personal aggrandizement and for my own personal agenda pushing, despite knowing that it is not being welcome, right? If I don't have that humility to accept that and change my course back to whatever I was doing, or try something new, then it borders around arrogance, and it also borders around disrespect to people who don't want to consume it. See, at the end of it, if I say you're not liking my Kampudi because I belong to this background, if it was someone else, you would have accepted. If I come to this level, then I can sing a horrible Todi and still say I sang a beautiful Todi, but you don't have enough knowledge to appreciate it. It can go to that level. Honestly, it is just the opposite of what art should be teaching you, which is humility. So experimentations have been done even in the recent past, right? And whatever has been accepted has been accepted. See, for example, if something has been tried in the last 10 or 15 years and something is still being, vociferously debated, then let's be humble enough to say that, what, it doesn't have great reception and try something else. Now, when you talk about pushing the boundaries, there's so much to explore. There is so much to explore, meaning that I really don't have words to say how much I can explore because it's just an ocean. If someone like Ramanathan or B.K. Patamal can say that all I could do was come near the shore of what is called Carnatic music, then imagine what is there to explore in it, right? So the question here is, there is a big canopy, there is a big canvas in which you are given all the free space to, express your colors. Now you say, why should it be within this canvas? Why can't I just go to a different plane and do it? Right? You can question, but where is the end? For example, I can say that who said chess should be played in 64 squares? I will play only in 100 squares. Absolutely, it's a game, but don't call it chess. If it is chess, it is played in 64 squares. As simple as that. It's a question of whether you have the personal dispensation and the personal compass to follow some discipline. It just comes down to that. Now, we have Raga Malika. Since you gave that example of changing ragas, we have compositions which are by construction Raga Malika, which changes ragams in every specific meter, right? So it is like saying that for the next 2 years, 3 months I'll be staying here, 3 months I'll be staying here, 3 months I move on. But I start off with a raga with a commitment that I'll be singing Todi, right? It is like entering into a marriage. Like after 2 months, I said that, what, let's leave this, let's look for some other spouse. And then, what, now my mood has changed. Like, where's the end to it, right? If you don't have a simple discipline to stick to something, how this is freedom. It's just lack of discipline.
There is another parallel narrative that is being consciously built on in the recent past. Carnatic music is like an elite club. It has got its own barriers. and it is doing a gatekeeping job as well. Whereas we have one narrative on this hand, the other hand, the all along till now in our conversation for the past 20 minutes or so, we have not deviated from the fact that our music is soaked in divinity and something that elevates the spiritual consciousness of the individual, be it a performer or a listener. So whereas you have one narrative where saying entries are barren, the other narrative which has also taken ground is to strip off its Shastriya element and the divine element, the divine roots of this music. For instance, just a few minutes back, you said, I will sing a Todi. Perhaps you may not like it because it is sung by me. So it is just to appreciate Todi for the point of view of Todi and not for the fact that Tyagaraja has composed on Sri Rama on every swara of this raga. So that element is seen as something which can be avoided and it's only music for the sake of music. So these two narratives, I would like to hear what your thoughts are about.
Barriers to entry in Carnatic music. First of all, people who claim that there are barriers to entry, there are people who are rationalists. Those rationalists do believe in evidence-based theory. Now, can the people who say that there has been barriers to entry give concrete examples of either people who were really good, but they belong to a different affiliation and therefore they were not given opportunities? Because there are only counters to it. The one musician who is considered the greatest of all times, along with my grandfather, is Sri Rajaratnam Pillai. Right? He transcends all caste, language, every barrier. I mean, every musician is like a slave to his music, right? And I mean, if you are talking about entry barriers, then why should John Higgins be performed? Or why Sheikh Chinna Maulana? What about KJ Das? What about Mandolin Silvas? What about Dakshinamurthy Pillai, the person who is considered the greatest percussion player ever by admission of my own grandfather and Paini Subramania Pillai? What about Paini Subramania Pillai? What about Rajamanikam Pillai? What about Tanjavur Murugabhupathi? Like C.S. Murugabhupathi. Now, if you take these musicians, we appreciate and we revel in their music not because of what background they come from. We revel in music for the music's sake of it. So the first point of barrier entry in terms of performance is totally debunked. It doesn't have evidence to it. Number two, has there been any evidence of people who belong to a different community who might have wanted to listen to Carnatic music but they were stopped, either directly or indirectly? I have not known of anything. I know of anything either. Has there been explicit or implicit way in which people have refused to teach, people belonging to so-called a different community or whatever? No. If you point out at certain things, you have to give clear reasons. For example, if that person belonged to a different community and he or she did not practice enough, then that doesn't count as that person belonging to a different community and therefore not being taught. So we have to have a level playing ground on saying that the only isolating factor which stops someone from teaching someone else is this. You have to hold other things the same. It's like a partial differential, right? So you have to be very careful about that. Now, there are no known incidents of the same rationalists who claim that this has been exclusive, right? Now, by this, am I saying that is Carnatic music a field that it can come as clean as it can be? Probably not. I mean, no field can be ideal, right? I mean, are you trying to say that if you are able to point out at some other field, let's say you are able to point out at sports and say that, you know what, Carnatic music should follow something like what is happening in sports, or Carnatic music should follow something like what is happening in films, right? Carnatic music should follow something like which is happening in journalism, or something that is happening in corporate world, something that is happening in bilaterals and multilaterals, something that is happening in academia. What is a good example that Carnatic music is such an outlier in this? That is a question. I'm not saying it is the idea. There could be stray incidents. But if you take those stray incidents and for your own narrative, if you take the outliers and say that this is the rule, then that is problematic and that is criminal in nature. It's a total disservice to the entire art and entire field, right? And coming to think of it, if you're talking about movies, those people who are propagating Tamil, right? In their movies, in their own productions, they bring in people who don't talk Tamil and make them as if there are not enough people who speak Tamil to act in the movies. So that is a kind of hypocrisy that people don't take, they fail to, they are being oblivious to it, right? So the two things here are, if you look at evidence, do you have evidence? The answer to me is as yet no, right? There are no concrete evidences. Number two, the other side of the story is that does that mean that it is as clean as it can get? We don't know. There could be incidences, but if there are, they would happen to be like exceptions as in any other field. That is the point that I'm trying to make. If I may just add one more thing to whatever I said earlier in terms of access entries, there is this kind of creating an artificial demand, force-fitting demand is something which is not going to work. For example, this is an example that I usually give. Let's say there is a fish market in which a certain seller or certain group of sellers suddenly say that, you know what, fish is not being consumed by certain communities like the Saiva Pillais or Saivamars or Brahmins. So until these communities consume fish, then there is no point in saying that fish sales are good. How absurd can it be? Also, there is demand. People are going to consume it. And I am going to, at the risk of being like very, very particular on this incident, I've had so many friends who have attended the concerts that happened in the beach area a few years back, and they have come to me saying that, and I'm also a witness to that. So I can say for sure, and I can validate whatever they said for years together, that there were so many people who came and said that who asked for this? We are not even able to carry out with our simple life. There has been incidents that way. But I am forced to say this now. Not that we didn't know this before. We are being very moderate and we are being kind enough to not even give importance to such things. Whereas the other side is actually picking the exceptions and saying that, you know what, this is the norm. But if I actually get into the details of this, then it's going to expose a lot of pseudo stuff that's trying to, uncover itself.
As you have very beautifully narrated this activist aspect without taking names or making it specific. In fact, today's news, if we see the John F. Kennedy's Center for Performing Arts in Washington, there is a big uproar ever since the dispensation at the helm of affairs today has taken it over, and the board members have got changed. Why I'm narrating or relating this to it is, whereas music has been the art form of expressing bhakti, elevating consciousness in the Oriental side, in the Occident, it has always been the medium of activism turned into perhaps of late wokeism. So this brings back to my older question, without harping more on the wokeism part, is today there is a strong narrative that the music is for the sake of art. It is music for the sake of music. Divinity is perhaps something avoidable. It has been accidental or at best incidental. So music for the sake of music is the devotion to music. What are your takes on that?
A few aspects here. First, there are different kinds of music. When you just talk about music, not Carnatic music, not Shastriya music, when you talk about music, obviously it transcends all barriers. It doesn't have language, it doesn't have background, it can communicate to anyone. All that is fine. But you are talking about a specific kind of music which is called Shastriya music. Okay. The reason why it has this unique identity is because compared to any other genre of music, this is a kind of music which has its roots to bhakti and devotion, right? This doesn't mean that a person who doesn't believe in God or who doesn't have bhakti should not practice it. There have been cases in which a lot of atheists have been successful artists. There are a lot of atheists who are successful artists, and I won't be surprised if time to come there will be a lot of atheists. But those atheists don't have the right to say that the Carnatic music was not born out of bhakti. That is something which I have a problem with, right? Now, I can sing a song on anything. I can sing a song on this laptop, right? In proper Suddha, right? Therefore, okay, where is the bhakti component to it? Well, the Suddha that I employ to compose this song on laptop is obviously inspired by the compositions which were created by people, which was created out of Bhakti. So indirectly, I have to owe my due, respects to the source. The source is what? Purandardasa did not compose Rama 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 because Ramprasad would sing it tomorrow. He composed it because of the bhakti he had. And Annamacharya composed those compositions. Tyagaraja composed his compositions. Trinities, Alvas, and Ayamas, those people who composed compositions, they created out of the bhakti they had. Not because of someone who is going to make money out of it. I'm making money out of it, no doubt. But the least I can do as a musician is to acknowledge that whatever I'm making money out of has a source to bhakti. That is the least I can do. It's like giving references, giving acknowledgement to the papers that you use for your academic journals. That is the least that we can do. I am not for the argument that bhakti is not required. You don't have to have bhakti, but you have no right to say that Carnatic music, sans bhakti, is also enjoyable. Then what is it? It's like saying tomato soup, but it doesn't have tomato. Then what is it? It's soup. So say that you are singing music. Don't say you are singing Carnatic music. Carnatic music offers you, the Shastriya music offers you scope at different levels, right? You can explore the grammatical part of it. You can explore the technical aspects of it. Be great at it, right? That doesn't mean, or that doesn't confer you the right, however great you may be technically, it doesn't confer you the right to say that it doesn't require bhakti. Whether you like it or not, that could be a personal choice, but it has its origin, its roots are divinity.
One of the early compositions of Mozart, he came into popularity when he had overheard a piece played in the church, which was only confined to the clergies of the church. And when he heard it, memorized it, came out and started playing it, it attracted listeners, and there was an awe associated with it. But whether we like it or not, all of the classical music that we say have had some religious component as a genesis right from its beginning, be it even in the Western genre also. The other thing is, of late, there is one beautiful producer who has created the raga composition called Beethoven Priya. That also comes out from Beethoven's that symphony called For Ellis, where he would have composed it in a different way, but then he had to give it as a bhakti shade. Tiruvarul Peruvai, Tiruvarul Taruvai, Murugane, something like that. It goes in the Tamil part. So quintessentially, this comes back to the form to which it has been anchored, which you had rightly said it in your own words. Just to going forward, where I find you as a rare combination with a PhD and a traditional music performer. Okay, and of course with an envious lineage, I must say, if I may use that term, and a tutelage, envious lineage and a tutelage. So, do you think today, if we talk of music today, is it becoming too cerebric, and even with youngsters making it too mechanical, notwithstanding their talent? Or do you see even the so-called conventional performances at the crossroad of skill versus craft? So, do you see the role of social media affiliation to specific groups, the superstar culture?
If I may have to trace it back to a few decades or even probably in the last century, you had all kinds of musicians who were extremely technically prowess, but who could not connect with the audience. And on the other end of the spectrum, you had people who could easily connect with the audience, but they didn't have much respect with the co-artists because it was way too simplified. So it was very easy for replication by other artists. And you had some people in between who had the mix of great technical skills. At the same time, the capacity to attract people through a connect which is, in for lack of better word, which is divine in nature, right? Which cannot be expressed, which cannot be quantified. For example, in near Tanjavur, when Madhumani used to perform concerts, after 8 p.m., the rickshaw wallahs never used to take sawaris. They used to say, Iyer Padram Nanga, right? So just imagine a person who is able to captivate a normal rickshaw wallah through what? I mean, did he dilute anything? He was singing the same Kana Kankodi, whether he would sing it in that same village or he would sing it in Bombay Shanmugananda, right? Or in Chennai or Sabha. So there was no dilution there, right? Even if he would sing in a temple, it would be the same thing. Whether he would, there are so many marriage concerts. There is absolutely no dilution. Just because it has to reach to the masses, they didn't do anything different. Now, why am I saying all these things? I have to address a bigger, umbrella here before I get to the specific point. This kind of intellectualizing everything has become a very fancy thing, right? Um, if you look at artists, I'll just talk about how this appetite for intellectualism is for artists, Rasika-s, and organizers. Okay, because that will help you set the tone of why, or it will set the tone for the spirit of your question, if I may. Now, Rasikas, a lot of them fall prey to this experimentation, fancy intellectualization, all that stuff, because subscribing to that makes you indirectly an intellectual. You may not be, you may not have thought enough about it at all, right? But when I say 1,000 times this is intellectualism, this is intellectualism, and if you are going to support me, then you are going to be called a person who supports intellectualism. Therefore, you are an intellectual. How easy can it become, right? And then it becomes fancy to say that, you know what, I care only about the music, I don't care about the ideology. And if you see, these are the same set of Rasikas who would be lauding India for taking a stance of not playing in Pakistan. If you can enjoy music for the music's sake of it without ideology, why can't you enjoy a game of cricket for the sake of cricket without the geopolitical reasons? So they really don't think about this. I saw so many social media posts that my students forwarded, which said that we have to applaud India for not playing in Pakistan. Well, you are the same person who said that I'm able to isolate the musician from the music. Where is your stance? Where are you actually? Right? So it's such a fancy thing. If you call yourself an intellectual, it has so many brownie points to you. That is one. That is from the Rasika side. From the artist side, well, there are certain individuals, okay, certain young artists who have been vocal about certain things, especially the last year when certain institutions came up with their own priorities of artists. And unfortunately, those few were actually youngsters relatively. Even now, I am talking to you about the current state of affairs, wherein artists who are much more, who have achieved much more than me by light years, those who are in 80s, those who are in 70s, those who are in 60s, they are not being interviewed. You are interviewing me, someone who is in 40s. Isn't this a sad state of affair for Carnatic music? Shouldn't we be thinking about this? And the ones that I'm talking about, they have absolutely nothing to lose, right? They have seen everything in terms of money, in terms of fame, in terms of the vidwat. I mean, uh, they are all like about 100 times of whatever I could have achieved at this age, right? But still, I am talking about it, which is pretty sad. It's pretty sad when you think about it. Then what kind of, you know, what is being set for youngsters to follow? Right? Beyond music. Music is one thing. After a point, you have to set some precedents for youngsters to follow when there is some kind of a crisis or when there is some kind of an issue. That's what the greats did. You talk about a Ramanathan or a GN sir or a Palghat Mani Iyer. They had clear stance. That is not happening now. Second part of artists who are like, I mind my business. I'm not asking anyone to do anything. I'm not encouraging anyone. But if I'm caught, I go play, I share the stage. How easy? Is it responsible enough? Is the question. My friend, he's a murderer. It's fine. I'm not encouraging him to murder. No way. I am not encouraging him to do any kind of antisocial activity. But we have been like, since childhood, we have been having lunch together. I'll continue to do. So many of my friends who belong to this category, when a lot of people who asked me, a lot of Rasikas who came and asked me, have they sold their dignities for money, for opportunity, for power, for connects, for network? I have no answer. I mean, what would I say? How would I defend them? I know them personally. I know their personal stance. But look at the optics. How am I going to defend them? How will you defend them? They are great humans, I know that. But what kind of signal does it send? Even their own Sishyas. What kind of signal they send to their Sishyas? That is the second point. Third point about the organizations. By and large, organizers still stick to traditional music and the Padhati kind. And in fact, in the last few months, there have been instances where organizations have been pretty critical of certain artists not trying to abide by certain rules and all that stuff. So that probably is something which could be considered encouraging for people who believe in traditional stuff. And this is the background with which we are operating, coming to your question, which is what is happening to the current crop of getting affiliated to this intellectualism. My grandfather, of course, and my father, who's my guru, he used to say, concert after concert, it could be just a minuscule, but has there been an improvement from one concert to the other? That is the first question as artists we need to ask. Over time, like when I look back at the last 5 years, when I look back at how I sang in 2019 or 2020, compared to how I sang in 2024 or 2025, if there is no significant leap, then something is wrong, right? Now, there is a limit to intellectualism, right? Because it is like magic. You can keep watching magic shows for some time. Beyond that, what is the substance? What is it? What is it that truly connects you? That something that connects you is something which is not quantifiable. So, for example, sometimes Jay Sudha just stands in one note. Okay, that is enough to fill the space. How can you quantify that? Is that a technique or SPB, who is not formally trained as anyone, right? When he sings some kind of a devotional song and certain phrases that he sings, it just fills your ears and it has a connect which you cannot explain. And those are the artists whose work stands out. Even today we talk about Mother Mani Iyer, even today we talk about GNSR, even today we talk about Ariyapudi Ramanathan, not because, of course, they had their technical strengths, obviously, otherwise you expect a bare minimum of technical prowess for people who have achieved. So that's a bare minimum, that's a baseline. Okay, don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying that you start with zero technical prowess. No, absolutely not. But over time, what you need to keep adding should be a reflection of your life experiences, basically, which is like as you get old, you're expected to get wiser. As you're expected to get wiser, you're able to even address those things which are not quantifiable. And that quotient is what is Bhakti. So Shamuni Sinasari used to say, it seems that once when father and I, we used to visit him very regularly. My father was talking about his Smarani Sukumu. He used to sing. Jalananjali. He said one of his, I don't remember, some friend or some friend's grandson or someone. So he played a recording of Shamuni Sinasari's Smarani Sukumu from 1940s, it seems. And he said that he could not sleep for like about 3 weeks because it was so bad. For someone like Shamuni Sinasari, who doesn't change even a small spot of a Sangati, you can listen to his Smarani Sukumu from his 1940s to till his death. There will be no change, not even an iota of change. Then what has changed if it's not a technique? I'm talking about just the song, not Manodharma. So it means that the more you think about it, the more refined it gets. And what is that? That is Bhakti. The more you start to understand and revel in the part that, what, Smarani Sukumu, I have to think of this Rama, the more you get attuned to that is when you are able to start expressing what Bhakti component is. So my grandfather used to talk about how when Paramacharya, when he utters Narayana, it has so much of vibration. Whereas if I say Narayana, it sounds so flat. Why is that? Because the number of times he has repeated Narayana over and over and over and over again, millions of times, gives that depth So when he says Narayana, he realizes Narayana. What is the technique here? What is the intellectual prowess here? No, it is a realization. So our culture has been always giving importance to this kind of experiential values and intellectual values. So people who are, I mean, you know this more than me, people who are experts in Nyaya, they will not even consider Tarkam to be anything close to that. It's like a prerequisite. And we are still here in Tarkam itself, talking about intellect, talking about arguing, talking about, Vivad and all that stuff. So there's so much to go, even in Nyaya, and then it goes to experience. Then you imagine Sachidanandam, right? So that's the spectrum in which, because that's what your Sangeetam is supposed to take you to. Sachidanandam is what you ideally would want to get to. So if you are in intellect, always, when are you going to elevate beyond that? Right? So this is something which I find strange, because the youngsters are amazingly brilliant. When I take a case of someone who is in his or her 20s or 30s, whatever he or she could do in probably 2 concerts, it might take like about few months for me to work hard and get the same output. That is one thing that is clearly appreciable. But are you able to connect at an emotional level is something which we need to wait.
Given a comprehensive reply, especially when you recollected the interaction or the Paramacharya's utterance of Narayana. So it is not in simple words that in our tradition we say that Achinoti cha shastrartham achare sthapayatyapi swayam acharate yasmad acharyah tena cha uchyate. So that because he's not simply called as Paramacharya for no reason. And that same thing applies even for all the so-called acharyas, another giant that you refer to, Shamangudi. So people have internalized that music and has come to that level where they can be self-critique and aspire for even going better. The other point on that same league, what comes to my mind is a few points that we discussed earlier, talking of entry barriers. Now, there are some technical minimum that one has to have, without which one cannot say anything can get past. See, unfortunately, what has happened in the field of education, be it even music education, today, if you look at the topmost adherence to number of examiners who appear is the JEE exam. On an average, 50 lakh students appear for it. And ultimately, those who can make it to the IITs are close to 40,000. Okay. And there again, you have different cutoff for different classes. If it is 90 for a particular class, it is going to be 5 or just simple 9 for a different class. So today, the music also in that, if it has brought in the centralized institutionalized educational system, if for one class the recruitment criteria is to do a Ragam Tanam Pallavi and perhaps a Grihabedam, for the other class it is enough if they even say the name of all the swaras, forget even singing them in the Shruti. So no wonder not a single musical institution that the government has run is able to produce a scholar or a good performing musician worth his or her name. It has always come from the non-scholastic or non-organizational belt only. You were perhaps the first person or one among the early who was very vocal. It has got more to do with your family, because this author whom I'm referring to has not only maligned your family, but has betrayed your trust. Because when your family shared some of the facts which are privy with in good trust, of course, later that author went and he went berserk and he exploited this trust in a big way. What is the current status of this tussle, and more generally, how worthy is that book to read, which has come out with such kind of convoluted background?
Honestly, it's not like a tussle anymore. The reason why I brought out the fact that our trust was misused is for other artists to be cognizant of something which might potentially could have happened. For example, because of this, if some other artist family are able to be a bit more careful in sharing their information, then the purpose is achieved. That's all. I didn't want to expose anyone. Personally, I have nothing against anyone, and why should I have anything against anyone? That's none of my business, right? It is my business, given the fact that whatever was said, the tone and the tenor was used as a narrative, which was not the case. Now, about the book, there is an I see it in two ways. There is one amazing aspect of the book, and there is one aspect of the book which I don't even consider worthy of being called a book. The amazing aspect of the book are the middle chapters, which actually talks about how a Mridangam is made, right? The factual part of how a Mridanga, how the wood is chosen, how the wood is grinded, how the hollowness is made, then how it is made to, get how it is made to, soak the moisture, and how the skin is taken off, how the war is being made, how the mood is being made, how the right side and the left side balance is made, and how things are made. That is an amazing piece of writing. Forget Mridangas. I would strongly urge every musician to possess a book for how beautifully it has been written. It's as pellucid as it can get with respect to how to present a process oriented information. So that way, hats off to the book. The middle chapters are an absolute necessity for every musician to possess. Now, the other part of it, which is a narrative around what happened, how happened. I mean, it starts off by saying, by creating a cloud that people from marginalized section of a different faith system were actually being almost exploited here. Now, if you are marginalized in a different faith system, why not that faith system give them enough, livelihood opportunities, right? Now, that is not being spoken of. And then you talk about exploitation here. And now, I have done a lot of primary surveys. I have been a researcher, I've been a ground researcher, I have done fundamental research too. My question is, how can somebody consider the validity of this book? Because it's not even a scientific survey, right? I mean, in fact, in the entire world, there are only 4 or 5 institutions which offer a terminal degree in survey construction. Imagine that. You talk to 4 or 5 people and you just come up with an inference and you say that, what, this is what it is, there is. Now, I'm not saying, therefore, the inference of the book is not valid. I'm not saying it is not scientific enough. I mean, there's so much of surveyor bias, there's so much of respondent bias, there's no triangulation at all, there's absolutely no questionnaire. It's an informal interview. Boss. I mean, if I stay with you for like 15 days, right? Don't I know how to gather the information the way I want, and how I have to ask the question so that you answer the way that I should, right? So I mean, I am a behavior economist. So if I see this, it is so amply clear that there's absolutely no scientific reason to believe the validity of the results of what the book says is. The funniest thing is the people who have lauded this book are some Nobel laureates who have been followers of this music from Harvard, whom I know, right? And they are experts in survey design and they are experts in behavioral economics. But the ecosystem is like so strong that they wouldn't want to actually, I mean, if it was a journal article, the same Nobel laureates would have, I mean, forget the Nobel laureates, even like a tier 3 academic institute would have just like trashed it. Right? I mean, there's absolutely nothing scientific in it. I mean, these people call themselves rationalists. So, boss, give me some kind of a scientific method to explain how you came up with the results. How did you get this information? What was your survey method? What was your instrument? What was your pilot? Absolutely nothing. And now you say that what there is some kind of and somewhere in the book it says that Pioneer Subramania Pillai was not even allowed to dream. Well, he was. I mean, it could be figurative, but the way it was written was as if like Pioneer Subramania Pillai and the author was like they were childhood friends, right? And that is one thing. I mean, Pioneer Subramania Pillai died like 10 years before the author was even born. And the other reference to Muruga Bhupati, if Pillai could not even dream, it was a crime for Muruga Bhupati to dream or something like that. I'm just giving you a context. For someone who made a slightly slanting remark on my grandfather, Muruga Bhupati sir, he engaged in a physical brawl, saying that how dare you talk about someone like Palghat Mani Iyer. This is the kind of mutual respect they three had amongst themselves. And here is an author who is talking about who is great and who is not because of what. I mean, like, where does these things come from? I have absolutely no idea. And this gets back to the other two questions that you asked about affiliation to this intellectualism, right? So when you talk about this kind of, you know, I mean, now I'm wearing a behavioral economist hat, and I'm telling you, you will see a lot of people, especially youngsters, really buying into this idea of intellectualism, right? And a lot of social media posts. One thing is fine, like these teens getting, carried away by all these fancy stuff, by this expression and all this stuff is fine. But artists who are reasonably well known, okay, who have visibility, they are getting into what is called PDA, which is not public display of affection, but public display of affiliation. Okay, so in behavioral economics, we say that this sends a signal to the ecosystem saying that, you know what, I belong to this. So, you know what, you take care of me. You don't directly say that, you don't call them and say that, you take care of me. But these are signals to provide them. And mainly it comes out of a source of insecurity, right? You don't trust in yourself. You don't trust in your practice. Why should you do that? Well, you may subscribe to it. But time and again showing that, you know what, this is my affiliation, this is my affiliation. You know what, I've gone with this person for a drink. You know what, I've gone with this person to this park. The seven of us were in the beach this morning. You know what, this morning we were playing cricket. You're a musician. You put posts about your practice, say what worked, what did not work. Occasionally you post, yeah, I saw Roger Federer, now I'm taking a selfie, great. Occasionally, once in 2 weeks, you say that, you know what, I made this sundar, it didn't come out well or it came out great. Great. All that is fine. But time and again, every 1 or 2 days, either you or your friends put in your picture wherein like you show your affiliation to a specific group and say that, you know what, opportunities, concerts, money, network, I'm here. Okay, I belong to this group. this kind of this sense of insecurity and this sense of lack of confidence in oneself, this kind of groupism is what I call this public display of affinity on affiliation is something which is directly connected to whatever I talked about, the survey stuff. So these two are highly interlinked. So the people who call themselves intellectuals, who don't employ an intellectual way of actually coming up with the results, and people subscribing to that because of lack of security.
Also, if you look at the composition of the crowd that comes to concerts which are filled with all these kinds of experimentations, others, you will clearly notice that about 30 to 40%, I'm not exaggerating, 30 to 40% of the crowd comes not for the music but for the ideology. That's why you will always see that in most of the social media platforms and also on YouTube, for such interviews with such artists, the comments will be about 90% from people who might not have any knowledge of concerts. Probably they might not even have attended such concerts. But the comments would be for the ideology part. So that's some concerning trend.
So this is how it works.
I mean, I'm amazed at the similarity of thoughts when it comes from a behavioral economist and what we in the science call it as this was given by Carl Sagan, who was an astronomer, very famous astronomer, and who has had a lot of communication. He said he has devised a kit to detect balloonies. And when you say about PDA, it reminded me of how to detect an idiot when he's subscribing to authority. So sheer subscription to authority without exhibiting or living by what your performance is or what you have bringing to the table, just by merely saying I am affiliated to such and such in a very sophisticated, in a very subtle way, is actually ending up exposing the idiocy.
I'm not even talking about these teams who can get swayed away by these kinds of fancy things like fancy Instagram posts and all that stuff. I'm talking about musicians who have visibility and who are really good at what they are doing. Still, they want to publicly display their kind of affiliation as something which is like totally unnecessary. Why do you have to signal that? I mean, just rely on your music.
That is why, because you ultimately psychoanalyzed it to their inherent latent insecurity. It is somewhere they do not have the confidence in that, and that's why they had to actually subscribe to this affiliation. And that is where, in words of Carl Sagan, it says you are in a way kind of becoming subservient to the authority, because by doing so, the artist feels that others will get taken away by this so-called authoritative figure or this affiliation. But that makes me ask you a very pertinent and very pointed question, which concerns you. That you have been one of the very few artists who openly took a stance against the decision of Sangeeta Kalanidhi. It was conferred to a specific artist in the last 2024 May. So many artists, like or unlike you, wanted to be vocal about it, but were reluctant. It was because of their insecurity or because of their fear of losing the wherewithal or subsistence, whatever it is. My question is, do you think mass resistance by taking such postures would be effective, or the grounds are already seeded? Do the stakeholders necessarily have any responsibility in it at all? What are your takes?
See, we asked for a clarification of what the selection process was for the Sangeeta Kalanidhi elect of 2024. So, because I mean, we had solid evidences of the Sangeeta Kalanidhi elect, making maligning comments on past artists, as well as making derogatory remarks against certain systems which are the building blocks of Carnatic music. So we never got a clarification. Our family did not get a clarification. So that's what we watched out. We didn't get a response at all. Like, what was the selection criteria that went into it? Because when the press announcement came, it said that the elect had other credentials. But when they personally, came out, they said that it's purely for music. So there were a lot of confusion on that. Still now it's not sorted. That's different. That being said, as I said before, stakeholders do have a keen sense of responsibility, I would think. If we talk about each artist, I give this example. Okay, I want to talk about the responsibility of the artist, of the organizers, and the Rasika-s. Let's say I'll start with Rasika-s. Let's say you know for a fact that you have your food from several restaurants, and in one of the restaurants you have perfect information that the owner of the restaurant has been exploiting people in his or her restaurant to get work done, and he is employing methods which may not be socially suitable or aligning to your mentality to prepare the food. But the food is amazing, is what you think it is, right? Now, when you have this kind of conflict going in, what would be a responsible choice for you? Would you still go for it? Or would you probably continue yourself with the other 6 or 7 restaurants you usually go with? Very simple, right? Now, when the restaurant owner says that, you know what, Annalakshmi is someone who has to be like whitewood of this earth. Let's say that's a statement he or she makes. Would you still want to go to that restaurant and have your food? That we can just superimpose on what has happened in the music field. For those who say, I care only about music, I don't care about ideology. Right? That doesn't fit well at all. And it gets back to the India-Pakistan thing. Right? It doesn't strike a chord at all. Now, when it comes to organizers, let's say there is a person who is constantly involved in some kind of a bickering with passers-by. Let's say he's having this tea in his tea stall, and every evening at 5 p.m., his only job is to, just catch a quarrel with someone. Or let's say he teases the woman who passes by. Now the question is, as a tea stall owner, would you care only about the fact that, you know what, my dealing is, I give him tea, he gives me money. Whatever he is, I don't care. I'm not saying that is wrong. That is one kind of behavior. The other behavior is, why do I have to engage with this kind of a person? Okay? So that is another kind of behavior. It's for people to choose. That is about the organizers. Something similar for artists. I think I alluded to this fact before, but I don't talk about his behavior. He doesn't talk about my behavior. Again, whether this is right or wrong is not what I'm saying. There are these choices which is available. People have to decide what is a more responsible choice. Every time you remain silent, we have had evidences in the past of how our culture has been denigrated because of merely being silent spectators, right? It's pretty costly. And tomorrow, when you have your kids who are at a very risky age of 11 or 12, these days that's the risky age, right? 11 or 12. And that is when you start realizing, oh, what kind of things are we exposing our kids to? That's when you start realizing what you subscribe to and what you don't subscribe to. Until then, until you are like 35 or 36, this will be like great thing to follow and all that stuff. Once you have a family, once you have kids, people start reversing. Even those who get affiliated to this kind of an ideology. I have like who have strongly been like supportive of such kind of ideologies, and once they were 35 or 36 or 37 or 38, once their kids entered like 11 or 12 or the early teens, is when they started getting really scared of what they are getting their kids exposed to. And that's when once, when you're 37 or 38, slowly you are expected to get some brains and all that stuff, right? With experience. So that is when things start to revert back. So this is what it is, and that's probably why those ideologies don't subscribe to family values. So as long as you're single and as long as you don't have responsibilities, right, that gets back to the bigger picture of why such rationalists don't believe in families, don't believe in any kind of affiliation or commitment and all that stuff. That's my opinion.
Last year in YouTube, there became a very big viral video when a young girl posted a small reel dancing Bharatanatyam but in a swimsuit. So it talks about what is a dress code that is needed for a performer today.
It's definitely a liberty, but imagine the same people who argue in quotes for the side of rationalists, why do they continue to wear the uniform of court, which is like black suit and white shirt? Why is that? The selectivity here. It's not the question of whether you want to exercise your choice. Then exercise your choice everywhere. You should only employ lawyers. I mean, the same kind of artists who believe in all these kinds of freedom, they employed lawyers for certain cases. Okay, that happened quite recently. If those set of artists came and said, I will employ only those lawyers who are against dress code and who go casually to the court, only they should argue for me, then that shows some kind of consistency in your ideology. This is not idea. This is like in Tamil they say vetti pitch.
Wokeism has actually no bounds, and I'm only reminded of a conference in which two keynote speakers dressed up for giving the keynote address in reducing carbon footprint conference, demanding separate vehicle to go to the venue despite staying in the same residence.
But I want to talk about a chat GPT question that I asked, and it gave like a toolkit for what's been happening in the last 10 years for secularizing Carnatic music. So in chat GPT, the question that I asked was how to propagate Carnatic music without Bhakti by people not realizing it. I'll just give you strategies which it throws out. And it will be really good if you are able to roll it up for the viewers here, right? So the question was exactly this, okay? How to propagate Carnatic music without bhakti? The most important factor here is by people not realizing it, because that is the modus operandi in which it happens. Honestly, it gives a set of strategies which actually seem like a toolkit that has been followed in the last 10 or 15 years by certain people. I'll start with this, okay? Organizational strategies. Okay, I'm not going into the details. I'm giving you the superheads. Under organizational strategies, establish secular institutions. Second, collaborate with diverse artists. 3, develop educational programs. Okay, the second head, performance and presentation. Look at this. Concerts in secular place, instrumental focus, vocal performances with secular themes. Now, marketing and outreach. Under this, emphasize cultural heritage without emphasizing its devotional aspects. Okay. Number 2, use inclusive language, focusing on universal themes, emotions and experiences and not bhakti. Three, social media and digital platforms leverage it to showcase music's beauty, complexity, and emotional resonance. Doesn't it seem like an exact toolkit which has been followed? And finally, you have community engagement, workshops, and master classes, focusing on technical skills and musical appreciation. Number two, lecture demonstration, exploring Carnatic music history, theory, and cultural context. Last, community outreach program to diverse communities, promoting appreciation and understanding. Tell me, of these four superheads and three subheads, 12, don't you think this is a perfect toolkit that has been like to the T followed in the last 10 or 12 years? Now, which basically means your AA space has enough information for people to have actually looked for this. I mean, unless otherwise they have been searches on this, how would AA throw this out? Right? So there's been a constant inquiry on how to actually have this happen without people realizing it. So that is the most devious part of it, and that is the most strategic part of the entire operation. So this is something which we all have to be extremely careful about. I mean, even those, those Rasika-s who says that, I don't think that there is any agenda behind it. There is no ideology behind it. I mean, there is this hard to separate. I enjoy. Please, you are all so rational that you are able to separate the art from the artist, right? Please go to your chat GPT, ask the same question, see the response that you get, and still, if you say that there is no agenda, I have nothing more to say.
Thank you very much. I mean, on that note, I think there cannot much be said because everybody is intellect here, and those who want to stick to their propaganda would anyway be sticking to it. But given the fact that it has penetrated even to the AI level, supervised or unsupervised, it speaks a lot on the ecosystem and the kind of narrative which is consciously being built to decimate some of the traditional art forms which have been a medium of elevating their consciousness and not just as a weapon to thrust certain narrative down the throat of the citizens. On that note, I thank you very much on behalf of the Atharva Forum to have spent your time. Perhaps this is one of the rare occasions when me as an interviewer is not asking you to sing, rather asking you to speak. I request the listeners to subscribe to Atharva Forum and wait for yet another scintillating session on this platform. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Namaskar. It was an absolute pleasure taking all your brilliant questions and giving me the opportunity to reach out to so many Rasikas of Carnatic music and subscribers of Dharma. Namaskaram. Look forward to more of this.
Thank you.